This is a video response to a couple of videos posted on YouTube about the agenda of the so-called Tibetan Dalai Lama clique. After watching these videos, I couldn't stop laughing. But once my laughter was over and subsided, I realized that many people might actually take these things seriously, hence this reply. Before I address the grave misrepresentations made in those videos, to help avoid what the Urban Dictionary calls collateral misinformation about the so-called hypocritical Tibetan Buddhists, it's necessary to convey the important aspects of a different paradigm. Why am I doing this? Well, first of all, Tibetan Buddhists don't see the necessity of pointing out what they consider to be obvious. Second, when we're locked in an unhealthy paradigm, it's hard to see the different aspects of a different perspective, ones that could be more healthy for us. So I'll try to take you on a short trip on the real Darjeeling Limited. Well, unlike the movie, this one's real. In 2001, I went to Tibet for a purpose, but it wasn't as silly as Angelica Houston's New Age's character in that movie. While hers was an interesting portrayal of those groupies, the movie missed on real self-awareness. It was a diluted Hollywood view, cynically mocking a whole movement by emphasizing a misguided minority. I was struggling with a few life questions. One of the same questions that a lot of people are struggling with now. How can the Dalai Lama and his people suffer the worst of human atrocities and still remain not only sane, but more compassionate for others? He's got something to learn, I told myself, and I think you're asking yourself the same question. If I flash back to childhood, I remember what my elderly relatives told me about the Great Depression. Faced with terrible situations, the best comes out in people and the worst comes out in others. This life in India and China is the same, where the best and worst come out daily. India and China, with over half the world's population and 5,000 years of strife, has lived this drama hundreds of times. This is an age-old battle with the best and worst. Why isn't the struggle visibly black and white, as I say? Because our view has been clouded and distorted due to the conflicted state of our culture. I call this the American delusion. Delusions are simply an unclear view of reality. Some are worse than others, obviously. How can this be? America has it going on, doesn't it? Or does it? It did. We slipped somewhere walking the talk. The Chinese and the Chinese Communist propaganda machine is correctly targeting our apparent hypocrisy. They call our sincerity into question, talking like an alcoholic who's trying to avoid self-examination. They say to us, well, you drink too, so why can't we? From a personal global perspective, the question is always the same. Are my choices healthy and life-affirming, or, while appearing fun and easy and entertaining, are they leading me into a self-destructive trap? Intelligent and people don't knowingly go to death traps. But as part of the delusion, they don't appear as traps, do they? They just seem easier and more fun. We are led to believe that they are happier. Pass. Then, when it's really the misinformed guiding the impressionable and naive. Americans have stopped even asking themselves the question. That is the deluded thought process that became clear to me as I learned about the Tibetan Buddhist view of mind processes. In the movie Cry of the Snow Lion, many incredible Americans give a thorough review of the Tibetan situation. I only have 10 minutes here, so I say go watch the movie. You can see it on my YouTube account and learn about it yourself, and learn about yourself as you examine the Tibetan Holocaust in progress. One thing jumped out at me in this movie, one that's easy to miss. One person said the Tibetan view of time is different than ours. We tend to look at time as something to fill with activities. This is true. After spending an intense week with the Dalai Lama and a bunch of monks this fall, an acquaintance of mine at Emory University made this observation. It's like they live in an alternate dimension, Patrick. My response, That's where I plan to live, and I suggest you do the same. Many people have fear of self-examination, so they fill up their time with activities and things to avoid questioning the very basis of their lives sometimes. Ignorance is a train wreck waiting to happen, and personal ignorance of ourselves is just short-sighted. Anyway, to make a short story even longer, my forte by the way, let's refute these silly videos and move on to more important questions. I think the best way to see the problem is to try to project yourself into a different world, a different paradigm. I try to bridge the gap of these two different paradigms for people because I have a foot in both worlds. Now, having a foot in both worlds means you usually aren't understood in either one, whatever. But please try to suspend disbelief for a little bit so that you can perceive the other. From a Western perspective, one might ask, what are you getting out of this? How are you making money? What's your agenda? So I'll try to address it really quickly. As a nurturing parent, I understand that the best thing you can do for your child is to imbue them with a broad perspective and a thirst for deeper awareness of themselves and the world around them. Not so they can take advantage of less aware people, but to survive, thrive, and do the same for others and their children. To make a child dependent upon ourselves limits them and puts them in a parental control position. This is emotionally unhealthy for everybody, and ultimately dangerous for the child, as they will internalize misinformation and therefore make less healthy choices. Societies are not different than families. They either support nurturing, life-affirming, healthy choices, or they don't. Teachers, nurturing parents, and mentors spend their time they could use on their own desires on others, as a vocation. Presently, these people are perceived as being weak. In the video, they attack the Dalai Lama's truthful portrayal of women as being critically important and the sincerity of his respect for them. How? By highlighting abuses by a few individuals whom he had met briefly. They'd taken pictures. His guilt by association is a silly ploy, hence my laughter at the movies. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama would say, this is very, very sad. Why would he say this is sad? Answering that would take a very long time. But suffice to say that life-affirming people are like farmers. They like to see things grow and develop, and they shield their crops from pests and dangers as best they can. They put faith in a risky thing called nature. She can bitch slap them to the ground without warning and destroy the entire year's crop. It takes a lot of faith in life to do that, to keep planting. But what happens if they lose their whole crop? Well, they replant. They continue on. Why? Because for life to survive on this planet, in the long run, it has to be nurtured on all levels. This is what the Dalai Lama is trying to tell us, by showing us how to monitor ourselves daily so we stay on a healthy path. He knows that distorted ego, aggressive traits, and often excessive expressions of emotion can lead to us to do harm out of ignorance. Intentional or not, unhealthy choices and activities can be and often are deadly. For example, how many people do you know who love to party and encourage their best friends to drink too much or take drugs that impair their judgment? Then, over time, watch them die. Of course, we protect ourselves by saying, he just couldn't handle his drugs, or she was all emotional and unstable and couldn't stop. This denial mechanism is just one example of how we trick ourselves out of guilt and responsibility. Why? Because our society is built on guilt trips and head games and the presumption that whoever is cleverer at deception wins. What happens when you eliminate guilt? Freedom. Not sociopathic evasion of guilt, where one thinks horrible deeds are not wrong. A freedom based upon a predisposition towards thinking before action. This simply means not doing the things that result in guilt later. It can be the same thing for regrets. If we simply behave in ways that we won't regret later, we avoid ever regretting anything. If we sincerely do our best under current conditions, then we regret nothing, except maybe being too lazy to eliminate the ignorance of cause and effects beforehand.